Hey, let's get going on our review for the final exam for World Civ 1, Spring 2015 at Newman University. So you have an exam to do. It will be part essay, part short answer. You have a study guide under content. If you've not been in class, please go look for that at Blackboard under the prompt content, and you'll find it right there. One of the things I wanted to talk about in this review, because if we indeed had the opportunity to do review sessions in class, which honestly I normally don't do, but we have time this week coming up. So one of the things to consider is what makes a strong essay. And I'm just here to remind you, I'm sure you've heard this in an English class, a communication class, or even in another history class or psych or soc. When you are in need of writing a paper, writing a position on something, there are some issues that you need to address. First off, a strong essay has a clear organization. Get going and just stay the course. That often involves a clear thesis. What am I going to say? How am I going to support it? That typically is your thesis. What are we talking about? How are we going to get to a conclusion? In that essay, you're going to want to bring in some evidence to support your position or evidence to support your analysis. So a clear organization, a clear thesis, and evidence for support. These things all make a strong essay. Don't forget also, do answer the question that's posed. Don't try to get around the question by going in a different direction. It becomes pretty clear pretty fast that you are kind of making it up as you go along. So, lots of studying going into this is also important. A well-written essay has a good beginning. What do I want to say? Here's your introduction. A good essay has 3 main points, maybe 4 depending upon the topic, or even 2 if that's what your essay calls for. It has 3 good points that help you to say what you want to say. This is your classic 5-paragraph essay. Introduction, 3 paragraphs, each with its own example to help you support your introduction, your thesis, and then an ending. Here's what I said and why it's worth knowing. So, a beginning, what do I want to say? A middle, 3 good points that help you say what you want to say. An ending. Here's what I said, and here's why it's worth knowing. A well-written essay also has good grammar and good style. This is not an English class, so I won't be grading you on word choice. I won't be grading you on sentence structure, spelling, etc. But a good English grasp, a good grasp of English, a good grammatical essay, a good essay that has some flow to it, that's broken up into paragraphs, makes it much easier on the reader. So you have a study guide, and the first question on that study guide is basically, how did the Greeks get democracy? So let's talk a little bit about that, and you may indeed use the information on this PowerPoint for your own study prep. If you have other ideas to throw in, if there are other things that I've forgotten that we actually discussed in class, that we had going on in class that you absolutely remember, please feel free to use that. Don't feel like you have to just give the information back to me on the exam that you're going to get here. Regurgitation, we often call it, just taking in information and spitting it back out, is never very interesting. Put your own elements into it, put your own analysis there. So the Archaic Era is a time period in which the Greeks got democracy. That's the period roughly between 800 and 500 BC. We talked about in class that there were many things that helped the Greeks get democracy, and we used Athens as our best example. There are certainly other things to talk about, other elements to engage with, but these are the ones we talked about. First off, the alphabet. We said that when the Greeks got writing around 800 BC, that they were able to begin to write down their laws. Previous to that, the laws were memorized, the law code was oral. But only certain people in society, namely the elite, knew what that law was. When we start to write the law down, more people have more access to the law. That means the elite in society no longer have complete control of the justice system. So, less power for the aristocracy, more power for a wider number of people. Colonization. We talked about colonization. Also, a feature of this period between 800 and 500 BC. Colonization came about when cities realized that their population was going to outstrip the city's resources. So it was a mandatory get out of town movement. What this did in the Greek world was to reduce the number of aristocrats because everybody in the Greek system goes. We talked about that process in class. We talked about how that's done. Great. Include that in your essay if you have the opportunity. But colonization essentially reduces the number of aristocrats in a given city because everybody goes. Second sons of every family, right? Second sons of every family has to put somebody in the pool to go. And you may reduce the number of aristocrats in a given city-state. This colonization is successful, and it will create cities all around the Mediterranean. That, in turn, will create a desire, a tendency to trade back home. So we were going to see a network of trade set up, and one group back in the home cities who really takes advantage of this is a group of merchants. The merchants start to emerge. And these merchants will be a new social class, a new economic class in the home city, and they will, in turn, put pressure on the aristocrats through their wealth. They'll have lots of money, these merchants will. They'll put pressure on the aristocrats to give them more access to the political system. Hoplite warfare. We talked about how this was a different approach to the military in the archaic period in Greece. Previous to hoplite warfare, only the aristocrats defended the city-state. Only the aristocrats had that responsibility. When we get the advent of hoplite warfare, it's a new fighting formation that takes a lot of people. You'll recall it takes a lot of people fighting in formation. Hoplite warfare helps to get us democracy because in the Greek mindset, if you are willing to put your life on the line for the city, you have a stake in the city. Therefore, you get a vote. So if you fight, you vote. Hoplite warfare required more people to participate than the aristocrats. So we have to open up the political system to more people if more people are putting their lives on the line for the city. We don't have the time to go through all the elements that we talked about with tyranny. Go back to your notes. Go back to your friends' notes if you weren't in class. But tyranny shows the power of popular politics. This is basically one man coming to rule during a time of crisis typically. But what seems to happen is that tyrants who are very popular, tyrants who listen to everybody else, the people below the middle class, the people who are available, the people who can't participate in hoplite warfare because they don't have the time or the money, the tyrants will indeed listen to the people. And if they can harness that power of the people, the power of popular politics, they can stay in power a long time. And the people, what do they get out of it? They get someone who listens to them. They get someone who makes reforms that they like. So the combination of law or the alphabet, reducing the power of the aristocrats who have sole control of the law because they remember it, colonization, reducing the number of aristocrats through forced colonization, creating a middle class that will enhance the social system at Athens in particular and require that more participation will be wanted by these folks because they have the wealth to really push it. Hoplite warfare, if you fight, you vote. Tyranny, power of popular politics. So if you were to be confronted with this essay, think about a 6-paragraph essay, an introduction that identifies all of these 4 elements, define each one, and then show how this particular event, this particular issue, reduced the power of the aristocracy, the leading elite, and gave more power to the democracy. What is Greek medicine about? I'm not going to go over all the particulars of this one, but here's what I'm going to tell you about. This is on your study guide. You have Hippocrates, one of your short answers. We'll look at that in the other video. You have Epidaurus, another one of the short answers, right after Hippocrates in your Andrea and Overfield reader. I would suggest if you're confronted with this one, give yourselves an introduction, and then what we're doing here is a compare and contrast. How would Hippocrates look at the practice of medicine? How did he look at it? How did the folks at Epidaurus, a healing center in Greece, look at medicine? How did they practice it? Hippocrates is interesting because this article here talks about how he is diagnosing epilepsy. And he's suggesting that some people will tell you, some people who call themselves doctors, that epilepsy comes from the gods. But he says the only reason they'll tell you epilepsy comes from the gods is because they can't heal it. He says, I figured out a way to deal with epilepsy, and here's what I think it is. And also, if I can treat it, how could it be God-given? How could something so amazing and powerful as the gods create something like a human malady that I, a lowly human, could actually help to repair, right? So he will question the role of the gods in illness in Greece and in cures in Greece. So take a look at Hippocrates. He is looking at rational medicine. At least that's what he offers, is a rational approach to medicine. Epidaurus, again, we said a healing shrine operating about the same time. If you take a look online, or if you take a look at that document, you'll see that there's a theater there, there's a gymnasium there, there's a place where people, almost like a hotel or a clinic, would stay, and they would treat people with diet, exercise, good sleep, and then they would also take a look at dream interpretation. So there's something going on about that. So the psychological, the physical, the diet. Again, these folks at Epidaurus would try to treat the whole person. We often think about holistic medicine. It would sort of be, again, moderation of food, moderation of exercise, good sleep, and then again, this sort of dream interpretation that you might think of as stress, you might think of as Freudian, you might think it doesn't apply at all. And that might be to you a little bit irrational. That's okay. The idea here for this essay would be compare and contrast these two approaches. In the end, what do you learn about Greek medicine from this? That would be both your thesis, what do you learn about Greek medicine from this comparison, and your conclusion. We have two questions associated with Rome. One of them is political, much like with the Greeks. And we spent a bit of time in class, you might recall, talking about how the Roman Constitution is a balanced constitution. And there are lots of ways to look at the Roman Constitution, for sure, but if you like your political history, I would take a look. We talked about how, first off, that there are elected officials. These are folks elected for typically one-year terms. They have extraordinary power for a limited amount of time. We have things like consuls. Consuls, you'll recall, have the power of kings. They lead the army. They are in charge of religion. They're to make sure that justice prevails. We have the censors. The censors, in addition to counting the Roman citizens and doing things like, long-range contracts, etc., they also make sure that the Roman citizens are morally upstanding. So censorship and conducting a census. Dictators, much like the tyrants in Greece, dictators come to power for an unusual amount of time. Because of an unusual issue for a short amount of time. So elected officials. Why are these guys balanced? They have extraordinary power, the power of kings, but only for a year. Typically they can veto one another if one or the other gets a little nuts. They cannot make law, but they can lead the military. They can conduct all the religious rituals that need to be done for the state. And they do act essentially as what we would call chief prosecutors for the state of Rome. The Roman Senate. Usually about 300 people at any given time. You get to be in the Senate because the censors make a list of those people who are eligible for it. And if you meet their criteria with regard to age, with regard to political experience, military experience, financial wealth, right, moral character, you will be in the Senate and you will do so for life. They typically handle finance and foreign affairs. So the budget and treaties of sorts, right? They can look at, if you will, examine the political careers of elected officials, and if they find that they have committed some kind of crime, treason, bribery, what have you, they can put those magistrates on trial. So the Senate, great responsibility in financial matters and foreign affairs. They can also check the powers of elected officials and put them on trial if they misbehave. Keep in mind that it's the elected officials, the censors, who say whether or not members can be in the Senate. So a nice check and balance there. Finally, the people. We talked about the people in class. The people, in order to be the people, you have to be a Roman citizen, male, 18 years of age, have a little bit of property. There was a property qualification to vote. What do these people get to do? They get to pass laws, they get to elect officials, and they control the death penalty of Roman citizens. They only meet once a year, and so you may think, oh, they don't have a lot of power, but only the people, assembled people, can pass law. Only the assembled people can elect those who will lead the state, and only the assembled people can mete out the death penalty to a fellow Roman citizen. So I hope you can see that the people elect the officials. The officials have extraordinary power. One of the officials the people can elect is a censor. The censor decides who can be in the Senate. The Senate has extraordinary power with regard to finance and foreign affairs. They can put elected magistrates on trial. Only the people can pass laws, but typically they're laws that are proposed by consuls or members of the Senate. Only the people can elect officials, and only the people can mete out the death penalty. It's a very nice, balanced system that worked very well in the Roman Republic while Rome had a city, and Rome maybe even had the Italian peninsula. This system worked really well. When we get into the imperial period, as you know, the strains of governing a grand empire with millions and millions of people really made this constitution a little stretched thin. We also talked about one of the ways that the Romans get an empire is that they have a very effective army. And as we said earlier, think about a 5-paragraph essay. I have suggested one of the ways that the Roman army is so effective is the following. You may have other ideas, and as long as you can support it, I'm happy. So why is the Roman army so effective? I suggested great numbers. The Italian peninsula has terrific geography, very fertile soil. It supports a large population. Also, it's a responsibility of citizenship to serve. It's an honor, it's a duty. And the Roman citizens showed up on draft day, sometimes more than the consuls needed to conduct some kind of campaign this summer. And so we see time and time again a great number of citizens show up on draft day. They saw it as a responsibility of citizenship, as a privilege of citizenship, as an honor, as a duty. The other thing to remember about citizenship in Rome is that as Rome expanded into the Italian peninsula, Rome made citizens. So as you are extending the franchise, extending the vote to people you are conquering, they too become eligible for the military. It's an extraordinary concept. The Romans are the only ones I know who've done this. We talked about adaptability. The Romans come in contact with a lot of different peoples who have a lot of different technology, a lot of different tactics when it comes to the military. And the Romans were very good at adapting. We've talked about how in the Greek tradition that the Greeks fight with hoplite warfare. The Romans will see this kind of warfare, they'll adopt it, and then they'll adapt it to the maniples. The maniples were more maneuverable. The maniples allowed for a greater ability for the Romans to take greater numbers of casualties, for the enemy to lose more men, and the Romans liked that. The gladius, when the Romans were fighting Spain, the Romans encountered this new weapon. It's a double-edged short sword, and this allowed the Romans, even though they were losing to Spain, they adapted this weapon, they used it in their formations to great effect. Naval warfare. We talked about the Phoenicians, the Phoenicians of Carthage. When the Romans come in contact with them, when the Romans are confronted by the Phoenicians, they will have to fight at sea. And early on, they adapt a way to do so. They use sort of a gangplank approach because seafaring, sea or naval warfare is very difficult, and the Romans will take some time to learn how to do that. In the meantime, they will adapt and try to overcome. Finally, discipline. We talked about how the Roman system is very disciplined. If you have got some of the complex maneuvers that the Romans use, you're going to need the discipline to pull it off. These things don't just happen when someone orders you to do it. You've got to practice and drill, and the Romans did. The Romans believed that if you disobeyed an order in the heat of battle, that the punishment for that ought to be death, and that the consul could indeed mete that out to you in battlefield conditions. One of the very famous examples of this is decamatio. And decamatio is just to reduce by 10. This is the root for decimation, to reduce by 1/10, excuse me. And the Romans basically said that if any time an entire brigade, an entire legion, the Romans used them, messed up, disobeyed orders, that we would kill 1/10 of that group. So very harsh punishment for disobeying orders. So great numbers, great adaptability, great discipline. We talked about a lot more than this in class. We talked about a lot of examples. So please use those examples from your notes. But if you're looking for a good organization, here we are. Moving quickly on to the medieval synthesis. And this is getting us a little closer in time to what we've been doing the past couple of weeks. But the medieval synthesis, we said that when Europe comes together, and this is between 500 and 1,000, that there are three things to take a look at when trying to describe European civilization. First off, we say the Roman element or the ancient element. And we broke this down into two in class. We talked about the tangible elements of Roman society, and this could be the Colosseum, it's still there. This could be the aqueducts, the Roman roads, the concrete that they created, the Roman arch in engineering. The intangibles we talked about, and this might be, say, language, Italian, French, Spanish. These are Portuguese, Romanian. All of these are languages heavily influenced by Latin. Also, ideas about Roman law, concepts of power. We talked about a lot of things. So what do you see left over from the Roman world? Christianity. The monastic movement we talked about is a big development happening between 500 and 1,000. This involves Benedict and the Benedictine monasteries. This involves Gregory the Great, the Pope in the 500s AD, who suggested, let's go north, let's go and convert these folks. And so using the model of using the model of Benedict and his monastic order, where you basically have standalone houses that are self-sufficient, right? We're going to plant these little monasteries all over Europe and slowly but surely begin to convert folks to this new philosophy, this new religion. And the basis here, where this Roman veneer, if you will, and this new Christian conversion is happening, is this culture of the Germanic warrior. The Germanic folk, we've said, we spent a lot of time talking about them. They have a warrior culture, very territorial, you might even say tribal. They hunt, they gather, some small agriculture, a little bit of agriculture, but not large-scale agriculture. No textiles that we're aware of, at least not at first. So the Romans are shocked that they wear leather and fur, things of that nature. So a very rough and tumble folk, polytheistic. We see this in their religion, and we see a lot of connections to nature in their religion, right? Trees, rivers, mountains, sprites in the household, taking care of chores in the house. There's all kinds of things that go on with this religion that seems to connect nature to these people. And then also nature and justice, right? We talked about the trial by ordeal, trial by water, trial by fire. So these are folks who really believe that nature has a significant meaning for them in religion and in justice. They work really hard to make a living out of heavily forested, rocky, cold, wet climate. So this is a very tough world in which these folks live. They will adopt some of the ancient elements of Roman society, and when they become Christian, and it'll take 500 to 1,000 AD, you really start to see all of these elements coming together. We gave the example of Charlemagne, the great Christian warrior Frank. He's a Frenchman, I suppose. He's a Germanic warrior. He controls France. And again, the best example we have here is on Christmas Day. The year is 800, Christmas Day. He is crowned Holy Roman Emperor by the Pope. So this great, large, 7-foot-tall Germanic warrior invited to Rome to become an emperor, even though the Roman Empire is gone, and made an emperor by the head of Christendom, the Pope. So that is that synthesis coming together. We gave lots more examples in class. Please bring them in. Things like Easter bunnies and Christmas trees. If you don't know those things, call somebody, get some notes. But absolutely think about a good organization that will help you through that synthesis question. Finally, we've been doing this past week, and if you haven't been in class, get some notes. There's also a pretty much more detailed PowerPoint presentation at Blackboard called High Middle Ages. So do take a look at that. We finished that up just this week, so I don't feel the need to go too much into review. But we said, what makes the High Middle Ages high? And I think on the study guide, I asked you to consider 3 things. Give me 3 good reasons why the High Middle Ages were high. We talked a lot about the economic boom of the time, and this is an agricultural boom that takes advantage of changes in invasions. Invasions stop in Europe. We don't get invaded by the Vikings. We don't get invaded by Islam from the south. We don't get invaded by the Slavs from the east. Everybody seems to be settling down. Agricultural boom, good weather, new technology. All of this leads to agricultural surplus. The population of Europe will double. It'll also lead to the development of cities, trade. So a big element there, this economic boom. Growth of Christianity. We've had Christianity spread throughout Europe from 500 to 1000. And now as we move into the High Middle Ages, this is this period from 1000 to 1300, as we move into the High Middle Ages, we see that Christianity also taking advantage of this high time economically, and that the church is growing. The church has a lot of land in Europe, we said before, and the church has an agricultural surplus as well. But this is the time of the great Gothic cathedrals. So when you take a look at that PowerPoint at Blackboard on the High Middle Ages, take a look at some of those images of the Gothic cathedral. This is the monumental building of Europe. This is when we finally start to get Europe as a civilization. Great monumental building, great economic surplus. We also talked very briefly about 2 other developments associated with the High Middle Ages, and one is the medieval university. You finally have the time, the leisure, the money to consider educating your sons, mostly sons, sorry, and you're going to educate them in law, in philosophy, theology. And then finally, we talked about the advent of such things as Magna Carta, the development of Parliament in England, the development of the Parliament or the Estates General in France. And what's going on here is that because we have such great stability, because we have such economic power, because we are moving into an age of education as well, we start to see the great men of Europe, mostly men, sorry, starting to say to kings, you know, we have laws around here, and we believe even the king ought to be subject to the law. So we start to get constitutional monarchies, constitutional states. So why were the High Middle Ages high? Pick 3. The economic boom is hard to stay away from. That's one that everybody probably ought to deal with. And then think about things like the Gothic Cathedral, the medieval university, things like Magna Carta. Again, see that PowerPoint at Blackboard on the High Middle Ages for a nice review with some images. Well, that's the end of this review video, PowerPoint. On the next one, we'll take a look at some of, not all, of the short answers that are up for grabs at your study guide.